sex with space girls and magic. I woke up early on Saturday, probably around 7 or 8 in the morning, feeling a subdued anticipation thrumming in my veins. The day was gray outside my window, but I could already sense that the interior of my apartment was going to transform under LSD's influence. I'd prepared 2 tabs ahead of time, telling myself that this was it. I was going for the highest dose I'd tried yet, about 200 micrograms. I'd done 100 micrograms before, but I felt ready to push further. In hindsight, I might have been a bit too casual about the jump. Before I ingested them, I made sure I had a comfortable setup. A cozy corner by my living room window, a playlist queued, a mix of jazz, some ambient electronica, and a bit of progressive rock, plus a few random rave tracks I'd discovered online. I also had some reading material lined up. Graham Hancock's stuff about ancient civilizations, a copy of The Invisibles, that wild comic that merges conspiracies, the occult, and reality-bending plots, and some biblical passages that I'd been meaning to revisit from a symbolic perspective. I often find that reading or scanning through such texts in the early part of a trip sets my mind into an open, receptive mode. Around 9:00 a.m., I dropped the first tab. 5 minutes later, I dropped the second. Then, I sat there, letting the LSD dissolve into my bloodstream, thinking about nothing in particular. I was excited but also a little anxious, aware that 200 drug was no joke. Over the years I'd grown fairly used to the LSD come-up, that creeping sense that the floor is shifting under your feet. But this time I had a feeling it would be stronger than usual. Sure enough, around the 45-minute mark, I started noticing the typical subtle shifts. The walls in my peripheral vision were breathing. My skin felt hyperaware of the fabric of my clothes. A slight buzzing hum seemed to fill the air. That's when I put on my big headphones. I'd queued up a playlist that started with some mellow jazz, Coltrane's Giant Steps. The notes swirled around me with a vibrancy I can't easily describe. It's as though each saxophone phrase manifested itself as lines of color in my living room, drifting lazily among the furniture. The LSD was starting to wash over me in waves. I recall grabbing a pen and a notepad, wanting to document what I was hearing, but all I produced were these strange scribbles, like some alien calligraphy, half musical notation, half abstract glyphs. I suppose I was trying to represent the melodic runs visually. If anyone else saw that piece of paper, they'd think I'd lost my mind. But in the moment, it made perfect sense. About an hour in, the visuals got more intense. My living room carpet, which is normally a nondescript grayish-brown, suddenly glowed in neon purples and yellows. This was sharper and more vibrant than any LSD experience I'd had before. Typically on 100 micrograms, I'd see swirling fractals if I closed my eyes, or slight warping if I looked at surfaces. But now, the transformation spilled into my entire field of vision. Edges pulsed, and patterns seemed to cross from the walls onto my own body. I was enthralled, simultaneously amazed, and a bit overwhelmed. Then came a sequence I can only describe as being beamed into a different mental dimension. The music shifted into something more electronic, with heavy bass lines reminiscent of a rave. My eyes drifted closed, and that's when the closed-eye visuals exploded into a scene. It looked like a massive outdoor rave in some lush, green environment. A forest clearing under bright sunlight, or maybe an alien meadow. The fractals were swirling over the grass and sky, forming a kind of ephemeral architecture. And from the corner of this vision emerged a group of women. Except they didn't seem human. They had green-hued skin, luminous eyes, almost like some cartoonish or cosmic depiction of nymphs or extraterrestrial beings. In my tripping state, they appeared incredibly alluring, wearing fishnets, some form of minimal rave attire, glistening in kaleidoscopic patterns. They moved toward me, dancing to the pulsing beat, beckoning me to join. What followed felt like a surreal encounter with these space girls. They radiated an aura of playful seduction. My rational mind realized this was all LSD-driven imagery, but it didn't lessen the experience's potency. They surrounded me, whispering about letting go, about surrendering to the raw energy of the moment. I felt a sensation akin to sexual arousal, but it was more cosmic than physical. In the vision, I engaged in what seemed to be an erotic interplay with 3 or 4 of them, simultaneously, all around me. Yet, in reality, I was just sitting on my carpet, eyes closed, not actually moving. I didn't physically do anything. No masturbation, no orgasm. Just this internal wave of ecstatic sensation that coursed through my mind and body. It was as though my entire stomach or gut region was fluttering with an orgasmic warmth. Time lost its anchor and I drifted deeper into the dreamlike scenario. Occasionally, I'd open my eyes for a second to see my neon-laced living room, only to slip back into that green rave scene whenever I shut them again. Eventually, the music changed. perhaps to a slower track. The rave environment faded, and so did the green women. I found myself grounded back in my living room, panting a bit, half laughing at the bizarre sexual cosmic fantasy I'd just lived out. That was the peak. The rest of the afternoon was a gentle calm down, but still distinctly altered. My sense of time was stretched. An hour felt like both an eternity and a blink. At one point, I turned on some classical music, trying to see if it would evoke more visuals. But mostly, I just melted into my couch, letting the fractals ripple across the walls. The afternoon sunlight streaming through the window turned dust motes into sparkling motes of energy, dancing in my field of view. My cat strolled by, and for a moment, I saw fractal patterns swirling around its fur. I remember feeling a profound love for that cat, an appreciation for its calm, unbothered presence. By early evening, the intensity lessened enough for me to move around more confidently. I was a sweaty mess, though, from all the emotional energy. I hopped in the shower, letting the warm water calm my nerves. The swirling patterns were gentle by then, almost comforting. A sense of relief, like I'd ridden a roller coaster and was stepping back onto stable ground. My mind started churning about my next steps. I'd originally planned to do a bit of ritual magic that night, some personal experiment with sigils and manifestation I'd been reading about. LSD sometimes sparks that imaginative or ritualistic side of me. So after I dried off, I sat at my desk with a notebook, sketched out some sigils representing different intentions: creativity, healing, success, protection, that sort of thing. I even drew one on my arm with a marker, feeling a bit silly but also curious to see if I'd glean any spiritual vibe from it. Night fell. My mind was mostly out of the peak LSD haze, but still in that open, slightly altered state. Lying in bed, I drifted in that borderline place between wakefulness and sleep. That's when I encountered another vision. A single figure, a woman with deep blue skin and luminous eyes, distinct from the green rave girls. She felt older, wiser, more solemn. She hovered in my mental space, exuding an air of authority or knowledge. She was definitely seductive, but in a less playful, more intense way, as if she'd seen countless eons pass. She beckoned me again, like she too wanted a sexual or energetic exchange. My head was pounding slightly, residual headache from the day, and I recall feeling I wasn't quite in the mood. But she pressed on, frustrated with my hesitation. Eventually, in that dreamlike mental realm, we had a strange cosmic union. I call her a succubus half-jokingly, but it was more like an astral lover scenario. She whispered ideas or wisdom, but I couldn't recall the specifics upon fully waking. Just the sense that she had ancient knowledge and was only half pleased with my presence. Eventually, I actually fell asleep. By the time I woke up the next morning, I was left with the memory of two distinct sexual spiritual encounters: the group of green rave girls during the peak, and the solitary blue woman near the night's end. Both experiences felt real in the moment, though clearly LSD illusions. Still, illusions or not, they were profound in their own ephemeral way. By mid-afternoon the next day, as the LSD afterglow wore off, I started thinking about how I wanted to approach LSD in the future. This 200 microgram trip was borderline too intense for me. I felt shaky, both physically and emotionally. My body was still dealing with the come down, and my mind was swirling with the leftover visions of fractal energy and ephemeral cosmic sex. I wrote in my journal that maybe I'd scale back next time. A 100 microgram dose or less seems more manageable, letting me keep some measure of mental clarity while still exploring creativity. On 200, the actual peak was so debilitating I could barely function. Sure, I gleaned some interesting insights, but the chaos overshadowed the introspection. I'd aimed to see machine elves, or the mothership, or higher realms, but in the end, I got seduced by space girls, which might indicate I wasn't in the right headspace for deep existential revelations. The glimpses of cosmic potential were overshadowed by sexual fantasies. Some part of me felt a tinge of disappointment, as though I'd wasted the trip chasing superficial illusions. But another part of me just shrugged. These things happen. LSD is unpredictable. I ended up laughing at the memory of that LSD-laced day. I recognized that my trip's storyline, space women, sexual unions, rituals, reflected my subconscious or the influences from the readings I'd done. Graham Hancock, biblical passages, the invisibles, all swirling together in my LSD-addled brain, creating an intense tapestry of the mystical, the bizarre, the comedic. It's a testament to LSD's ability to fuse daily influences into an outlandish narrative. Sitting here reflecting, I realize that these wild experiences can hold lessons, or they can just be something that happened. I used to think every LSD journey needed to yield profound cosmic truths. Now I see that sometimes it's just the mind playing with symbolic content. The part about me wanting knowledge for knowledge's sake, like I'm some cosmic tourist collecting experiences, rings true. The LSD trip confronted me with that. Maybe that's the real message. LSD is telling me to examine why I trip. If it's purely for novelty, the journey might keep throwing me these bizarre loops that lead nowhere. If I approach it with humility or purposeful intent, maybe I'd glean deeper transformation. But for now, I'm left with a strange gratitude that, despite the intensity, nothing catastrophic happened. I emerged physically safe, albeit mentally rattled. A day later, the fractals were gone, the sex visions receded, and life resumed. I remain a bit changed, though, carrying the memory of green and blue cosmic lovers, bright fractals, scribbled music scores, and a sense that maybe next time, I should dose lower. Because as mesmerizing as 200 micrograms can be, it's not always the best path to the meaning I crave. Or perhaps LSD is telling me, you have enough knowledge to go live, go embody love, or do something else with your lessons, instead of just returning to me for more data. Either way, the trip stands out in my personal LSD history. An example of how high doses can lead you astray or give you experiences you never anticipated. Some comedic, some erotic, some faintly spiritual, and it reaffirms that, for me, the sweet spot for LSD might be somewhere under 200. Sure, I got to meet space girls and cosmic entities, but the bigger question is, did I truly learn anything from them, or just get lost in the swirl? Time, as always, will tell.